never think it'll happen to you until you're alone on a dark highway, watching those same headlights follow you for 2 straight hours. That's when all those true crime podcasts start playing in your head, and every worst-case scenario becomes terrifyingly possible. I was driving back from my sister's wedding in Memphis, taking the long stretch of I-40 east toward Nashville. The October night had settled in early, and the highway had thinned out to just a few scattered cars. My GPS showed another 3 hours until home, and I was already regretting not staying at a hotel like my mom had suggested. The first time I noticed the silver sedan, it was around 9:30 p.m. Nothing special about it, just another pair of headlights in my rear-view mirror. But after 30 minutes of maintaining the exact same distance behind me, I started paying attention. When I sped up to 75, they sped up. When I slowed to 65, they matched my speed perfectly. I tried telling myself it was nothing. Plenty of people take this highway. Maybe they were just heading the same way. But then I changed lanes to let a truck pass, and they changed lanes too. I moved back. They followed. My hands started getting sweaty on the steering wheel. An hour in, I tested them. I took my exit ramp at the last second, heart pounding. The silver sedan swerved across 2 lanes of traffic to follow. That's when the real fear set in. This wasn't coincidence anymore. They were following me. I called 911, but out here between cities, I couldn't tell them exactly where I was. The dispatcher said they'd send highway patrol to look for me, but I'd need to get to a populated area. The nearest town was still 40 minutes away. My gas gauge was getting low. I'd have to stop eventually, but the thought of pulling into a dark gas station with that car behind me made my stomach turn. I remembered all those stories about predators working in pairs, about how they'd wait until their target was vulnerable. I started taking random exits, doubling back, making sudden turns, anything to shake them. But those headlights stayed fixed behind me, like they knew exactly where I was going. Through my rear-view mirror, I could make out the silhouette of at least 2 people in the car. At mile marker 242, I spotted a brightly lit Love's truck stop. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely steer into the exit lane. The silver sedan followed, but for the first time, they kept their distance, crawling past the gas station entrance. As they passed under the fluorescent lights, I finally got a clear look at the car. It was an older model Chevrolet Impala, its silver paint dulled with age. But what made my blood run cold was what I saw in their back seat. Coils of rope, duct tape, and what looked like a heavy tarp. I pulled into the gas station, positioning my car right in front of the store entrance where a group of truckers were gathered. The silver sedan circled the parking lot once, slowly, before disappearing back onto the highway. My legs were too shaky to stand, so I sat there, doors locked, watching the entrance to make sure they didn't come back. A truck driver must have noticed something was wrong, because he approached my car, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "You okay, miss? You look like you've seen a ghost." I rolled my window down just enough to talk. There was a car following me for hours. They had things in their back seat. He nodded grimly. "You're not the first. We've had reports of a silver Impala stalking solo drivers along this stretch. They usually target women driving alone at night. Highway patrol's been looking for them, but they're smart. They switch plates, take back roads when they spot cops. I ended up calling my dad, who drove 2 hours to meet me at the truck stop. The whole time I waited, that group of truckers took shifts keeping watch, making sure that silver sedan didn't come back. One of them told me they'd found a girl's car abandoned at a rest stop just last month, just up the highway. 2 weeks later, I saw a news report that made my stomach drop. Highway patrol had found the silver Impala crashed in a ditch about 60 miles from where I'd last seen it. Inside, they discovered evidence linking the car to 3 missing persons cases along I-40. They never caught the drivers. Sometimes, when I'm driving at night, I still check my rearview mirror obsessively, watching for headlights that follow too closely or too long. I don't drive alone after dark anymore if I can help it. And I always always make sure I have a full tank of gas before sunset. But the thing that haunts me most isn't what I saw in their backseat, or even how long they followed me. It's wondering how long they had actually been watching before I noticed them. How many exits had they followed me past while I was singing along to the radio, completely oblivious? How many other drivers had they stalked, watching and waiting for the perfect moment? The highway feels different now. Every pair of headlights holds a potential threat. Every car that maintains the same speed for too long sets off alarm bells. People tell me I'm being paranoid, that lightning doesn't strike twice. But they weren't there. They didn't spend 2 hours playing cat and mouse with predators who'd done this before, who knew exactly what they were doing. Last month, my sister called to tell me she was driving down for a visit. She planned to take I-40, driving through the night to avoid traffic. I made her promise to stay at a hotel instead. She laughed, called me overprotective. "It's just a highway," she said. "What are the chances?" I didn't tell her about the rope or the duct tape or the tarp. I just told her to check her rear-view mirror regularly, and to never assume those headlights behind her are just another traveler heading the same way. Because sometimes, in those empty stretches of highway where the night seems to go on forever, they're not just following you, they're hunting. Now, whenever people ask me why I'm so cautious about driving at night, I tell them this story, not to scare them, but to remind them that the real monsters aren't supernatural creatures or urban legends. They're people who know how to exploit our vulnerability, our trust, our assumption that nothing bad can happen to us. The silver sedan taught me that the scariest part of any horror story isn't the jump scares or the gore. It's the slow, creeping realization that you're not as safe as you thought you were. That sometimes the difference between a close call and a tragedy is as simple as noticing those headlights in your rearview mirror just in time. I still drive that stretch of I-40 sometimes. I have to, but I never do it alone, and I never do it at night. And every time I pass mile marker 242, I say a quiet thank you to those truck drivers who stood guard while I waited for my dad. Because without them, my story might have had a very different ending. And somewhere out there, those predators are still hunting. Maybe not in a silver sedan anymore, but they're out there. Watching, waiting, following. So the next time you're driving alone at night and you notice the same pair of headlights following you for a little too long, don't assume it's just paranoia. Sometimes that gut feeling telling you something's wrong isn't just your imagination. Sometimes it's trying to save your life. Have you ever felt that primal, instinctive dread that turns your blood to ice? That's what I felt when I found my husband's phone on the restroom floor, its screen glowing with an unsent message. Don't get out of it started as just another exhausting night on our cross-country move from Seattle to Boston. The kids were finally asleep in the back seat, and Sarah, my wife, was dozing beside me. The dashboard clock read 3:17 a.m. when I spotted the rest stop sign along I-90 in rural South Dakota. We'd been driving for 16 hours straight, stopping only for gas and quick bathroom breaks. The moving truck behind us held everything we owned, and paranoia about leaving it unattended had kept our stops minimal. But nature calls, and when you're in the middle of nowhere with 2 kids under 10, you take what civilization you can get. The rest stop looked like every other one we'd seen. A simple concrete building with separate entrances for men and women, surrounded by a few dim overhead lights that created more shadows than illumination. The parking lot was empty except for a single semi-truck parked far in the corner, its engine idling. I pulled in, parking directly under one of the lights. "I'll be quick," I told Sarah, who stirred slightly but didn't fully wake. I grabbed my phone, force of habit, and stepped out into the damp night air. The temperature had dropped since sunset, and my breath came out in visible puffs. The fluorescent lights inside the restroom buzzed and flickered, that harsh institutional lighting that makes everyone look sickly. 2 of the 4 bulbs were dead, leaving corners in darkness. The place smelled strongly of industrial cleaner, too strongly, like someone had recently doused the whole room in it. I was washing my hands when I heard the door open behind me. In the mirror's reflection, I caught a glimpse of someone entering, a man in dark clothes. Something about his movement seemed off, too deliberate. But before I could process why that bothered me, the lights went out. Complete darkness. The kind that feels solid, tangible. I heard footsteps, but they weren't moving away. They were coming closer. I reached for my phone to use its light, but my wet hands fumbled, and I heard it clatter to the floor. That's when I heard the second set of footsteps. Pure instinct took over. I dropped to the ground, crawling silently toward where I remembered the door being. My hand touched something that wasn't water, something that smelled metallic. The cleaning fluid smell suddenly made horrible sense. It was covering something else. I heard whispered voices, the sound of something heavy being dragged. My shoulder hit the door frame and I slipped out, not running. Running makes noise, but moving as fast as I could while staying silent. The cool night air hit my face as I rounded the corner of the building. I made it back to the car, hands shaking so badly I could barely open the door. Sarah woke up as I started the engine. "What's wrong?" she asked, instantly alert at my expression. "Where's your phone?" "We need to go. Now." I threw the car into reverse, tires screeching as I backed out. In my rear view mirror, I saw two figures emerge from the restroom. They stood watching us leave, not chasing, not calling out, just watching. We drove for an hour before I felt safe enough to stop at a brightly lit gas station. While Sarah called the police, I tried to make sense of what had happened. That's when I remembered my phone. The unsent message I'd started typing when I first felt something was wrong. The police found my phone on the restroom floor, along with evidence that made me sick to my stomach. Blood traces, despite the heavy cleaning. Personal belongings stashed in the ceiling tiles. And worst of all, they found camera equipment hidden in the vents, the kind used to watch for targets. The truck I'd seen in the parking lot was gone by the time the police arrived. They told us similar setups had been found at other remote rest stops along I-90. A pattern of disappearances, always late at night, always targeting travelers who looked tired enough to let their guard down. They said I was lucky. If I hadn't dropped my phone, if I hadn't moved silently, if I'd hesitated even a few seconds longer. The security footage from the gas station where we stopped showed two men in a black pickup truck following us for almost 20 minutes before turning back. Now, 2 years later, I still can't use rest stop bathrooms. The kids don't understand why we only stop at busy gas stations, why Dad insists on everyone going together, why we never drive through the night anymore. Sarah understands, though. She was the one who saw the news report 3 months after our incident. They found 3 bodies buried behind that rest stop. All travelers, all disappeared within the previous year. The police said there were probably more they hadn't found yet. The killers knew what they were doing. They picked places where people were expected to stop briefly and move on, where a single car in an empty parking lot wouldn't raise suspicions. Sometimes I wonder about that unsent message on my phone. Don't get out of the car? The building? Was I trying to warn myself or my family? I'll never know what I meant to type. But I know this. Those men had done this before. The methodical way they moved in the dark, the prepared clean up the hidden cameras. They were hunters, and that rest stop was their blind. I think about the other travelers who stopped there in the middle of the night. Did they feel the same unease I did? Did they notice the too strong smell of cleaner, the deliberate movements of strangers in the dark? Did they try to send warnings that were never received? The police never caught them. The black pickup truck was found abandoned in Wyoming, wiped clean. The rest stop was demolished last year. Liability issues, they said. Now it's just an empty patch of concrete, slowly being reclaimed by prairie grass. But sometimes, when I'm driving that stretch of I-90, I still see cars pulled over there, travelers drawn to the promise of a brief rest. I want to stop to warn them. I want to tell them about the phone on the floor, the message never sent, the shadows that move with purpose in the dark. I want to tell them that convenience isn't worth the risk, That fatigue is better than never making it home. But I don't stop. I keep driving, checking my mirrors, watching for black pickup trucks and men who move too deliberately. I keep my kids close and my stops planned because I learned something that night in South Dakota. The real monsters don't hide under beds or in closets. They hide in plain sight, in places we've been taught to trust. They count on our exhaustion, our complacency, our unwillingness to appear paranoid. They wait in the spaces between cities, in the hours between midnight and dawn, for people too tired to notice the warning signs. And somewhere out there, they're still waiting, still watching, still hunting. So if you're driving late at night and you see a rest stop ahead, keep driving. Those few extra miles to the next town might just save your life. And if you absolutely must stop, remember my unsent warning. Don't get out of the... Sometimes the most unsettling warnings come from the unlikeliest sources. That rainy night in Colorado, an elderly hitchhiker's desperate pleas saved our lives, though we wouldn't know it until the next morning's news. My wife Emma and I were driving cross-country to California, taking the scenic route through Colorado's mountain passes. The storm had started about an hour earlier, sheets of rain hammering our windshield while thunder echoed off the canyon walls. That's when we spotted him, an old man in a dripping raincoat, thumb extended, looking more like a drowning victim than a hitchhiker. "We can't just leave him out here," Emma said, and I agreed. We'd always been careful about hitchhikers, but something about leaving an elderly man in a storm felt wrong. I pulled over, and he practically dove into our back seat, water cascading off his coat. Thank you," he wheezed, his weathered face appearing in the rearview mirror. Not many folks would stop in weather like this. He introduced himself as Gerald, said he'd been visiting his grandson when his car broke down. Something about the way his eyes kept darting to the road ahead made me uneasy. "Where you headed?" I asked, trying to sound casual. That's when things got strange. "Where are you folks planning to go?" he countered, leaning forward between the seats. When I mentioned taking Route 50 through the mountains, his whole demeanor changed. His hand started shaking, and I noticed he was clutching an old newspaper clipping so tightly it was crumpling. No, you can't take Route 50, he said, his voice rising. "Not tonight. Take the I-70 detour. It's longer, but please, you have to trust me on this." Emma and I exchanged glances. The old man's intensity was unsettling, but his fear seemed genuine. "Why not Route 50? Emma asked gently. Gerald's response came out in a rush. "Things happen on that pass. Bad things. People disappear up there, especially in weather like this." He thrust the crumpled newspaper clipping forward. "Look, just from the past year, the article was dated 2 months ago. String of unexplained disappearances plagues Mountain Pass," read the headline. 5 vehicles had vanished along that stretch in the past year, all during storms. Search parties found nothing, no wreckage, no bodies, just empty road. "Could be accidents," I suggested. "Mountain roads are dangerous in bad weather." Gerald shook his head violently. "No, you don't understand. My grandson's a park ranger. He's seen things up there. Strange lights in the storm. Tire tracks that lead straight to cliff edges and just stop. Cars that show up abandoned, doors open, engines running, but no signs of distress. No footprints, even in mud or snow." A flash of lightning illuminated his face, and I saw real terror in his eyes. "Last month, they found a car. Everything inside was reversed, steering wheel, pedals, seats, all installed backward. Factory-grade installation. The driver was never found. Tell me how that happens in an accident." I felt Emma's hand tighten on my arm. The rain seemed to pound harder, and the darkness beyond our headlights felt somehow thicker. Gerald kept talking, his words tumbling out faster. "They always disappear in storms. Always at night. The police say it's just accidents or runaway vehicles or people getting lost. But My grandson showed me the files. Every single missing person reported seeing something strange before they vanished. Lights where there shouldn't be lights. Roads that shouldn't exist. Signs pointing the wrong way. Please, he begged, take I-70. I'll show you the turnoff. It's only another hour out of your way. What's an hour compared to? He trailed off, staring at something through the rain-streaked window. I followed his gaze, but saw only darkness and the wavering beam of our headlights. Then, just for a moment, I thought I saw something else. A flicker of light where there shouldn't be any light, moving in a way that didn't match the storm. We took the I-70 detour. Gerald fell silent after that, tension gradually leaving his body as we got further from Route 50. We dropped him at a truck stop where his daughter was waiting. Before he got out, he pressed a newspaper clipping into Emma's hand. "Keep it," he said. "Show others. Make them believe." We checked into a motel for the night, the storm still raging outside. In the morning, we woke to news alerts on our phones. Route 50 had been hit by a massive landslide during the night, exactly where we would have been driving. 3 vehicles were caught in it. They never found the bodies. Emma still has that newspaper clipping. Sometimes, on dark nights when the rain is pounding and the roads ahead look uncertain, we take it out and remember Gerald's warning. We think about what might have happened if we hadn't stopped for that rain-soaked figure on the roadside. The article itself has yellowed now, but the words still send chills down my spine. Because below the main story about the disappearances, there's a smaller item we didn't notice that night. It's an obituary, dated 6 months before we picked him up. It's for Gerald Thompson, age 78, former park ranger, killed in a car accident on Route 50. The photo matches our hitchhiker exactly. We've never driven that stretch of Route 50, not even in good weather. Sometimes we look up news reports about the area, about the disappearances that still happen during storms. The official explanations always sound reasonable. Accidents, mechanical failures, driver error. But we know better, because whatever Gerald was, ghost, guardian angel, or something else entirely, he saved our lives that night. His warning kept us off that mountain pass when the earth itself tore open, and sometimes on stormy nights when we're driving through mountains, we watch for hitchhikers. Not to pick them up. No, we learned a different lesson about that. We watch because sometimes the most important warnings come from those who've seen the danger firsthand. Sometimes the difference between life and death is being willing to listen to a stranger's fear. The mysteries of Route 50 remain unsolved. More vehicles have vanished, more searches have failed, more families are left wondering. The police have their theories, the locals have their stories, and somewhere in between lies the truth. But we believe Gerald. We believe him because he was more scared of what waited on that mountain pass than he was of death itself. We believe him because whatever happened up there was terrible enough to keep his spirit bound to that road, warning travelers away from the fate he couldn't escape. And on nights when the storm clouds gather over mountain passes and lightning flickers in ways that don't quite match nature's rhythm, we remember the old man who saved us. We take the long way round, no matter how much time it adds. Because sometimes an hour's detour is the difference between making it home and becoming another mysterious headline, another unsolved disappearance in the mountain darkness. After all, what's an hour compared to forever? They say technology makes us safer, but my GPS almost got me killed. What I thought was a simple navigation error turned out to be something far more sinister, a trap that nearly made me another statistic in a string of disappearances. I was heading home from a late shift at the hospital, taking my usual route through downtown Detroit. It was just past 2 a.m., that hollow hour when the streets belong to people who either have to be out or shouldn't be out at all. I'd made this drive hundreds of times, but tonight my GPS suddenly chimed with a new route. Rerouting due to heavy traffic ahead, the automated voice announced. Strange for this time of night, but I didn't question it. That was my first mistake. The new route took me off the main roads and into the industrial district. During the day, This area bustled with warehouse workers and shipping trucks. At night, it transformed into a maze of empty streets and abandoned buildings, their broken windows gaping like hungry mouths in the darkness. 10 minutes into the detour, I noticed the first van. White, unmarked, keeping pace about 2 blocks behind me. My nurse's instincts, honed by years of reading people and situations, started tingling. When it took the same 3 turns as me, those tingling instincts became blaring alarms. I tried to return to my original route, but the GPS kept rerouting me back to these deserted streets. Each time I ignored its directions, it would recalculate, insisting on leading me deeper into the industrial zone. That's when I noticed the second van. This one was dark-colored, approaching from a side street ahead. Both vans were now matching my speed exactly, keeping their distance but definitely following a pattern. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but there was no signal. The screen showed full bars, but calls wouldn't connect. My GPS chimed again. Turn right in 500 feet. The right turn would take me down a narrow street between 2 abandoned warehouses. Dark alleys branched off on both sides. Perfect places for a vehicle to be trapped. Perfect places for people to disappear. I blew past the turn. The GPS stayed silent for a moment, then make a U-turn when possible. The vans were getting closer now, their headlights growing larger in my mirrors. I spotted a third vehicle joining them, this one a black SUV. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel as I tried to remember the self-defense class I'd taken last year. The instructor had talked about carjackings, how they often involve multiple vehicles, how they herd their targets into isolated areas. He'd mentioned something else too, something about GPS systems being hacked to guide victims into traps. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a glitch. This was coordinated. They had somehow taken control of my navigation system, and I'd blindly followed it right into their trap. I killed the GPS and turned off my phone completely. Without their electronic leash, I had a chance. I knew these streets from my ambulance rotation days. There was a police station about 6 blocks north, but as I turned toward it, the van started closing in. The white van accelerated, pulling alongside me. I caught a glimpse of the driver, face hidden behind a dark ski mask. He started edging toward my lane, trying to force me toward the curb. The dark van was right behind me now, high beams blinding me through the rear window. I did the only thing I could think of. I slammed on my brakes. The white van shot forward, not expecting the sudden stop. The van behind me swerved to avoid collision, mounting the curb with a shower of sparks. I yanked the wheel hard, cutting across a parking lot before they could recover. My car wasn't anything special, just a Honda Civic, but fear is one hell of a fuel source. I shot through narrow gaps between buildings, taking random turns, using every trick I'd learned from years of emergency response driving. The vans couldn't match my car's agility in these tight spaces, but they didn't have to. They were hurting me again, I realized, pushing me toward something. That something turned out to be a dead end. The street ended abruptly at a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. As I skidded to a stop, headlights flooded my mirrors, all 3 vehicles blocking the only escape route. Car doors started opening. Dark figures emerged. In that moment of pure terror, I remembered another detail from that self-defense class. The instructor had said that most people freeze when their primary escape route is blocked. They forget to look for alternatives. They forget that sometimes the best way out is through. I revved my engine and aimed straight for the fence. The Honda hit the chain link at 40 miles per hour. Metal screamed against metal as the fence twisted and parted. My airbag deployed, pummeling me with what felt like a heavyweight's punch, but I kept my foot on the gas. Behind me, I heard shouts and screeching tires. I didn't stop driving until I reached the police station. The front of my car was mangled, strips of chain link still tangled in the bumper. As I stumbled into the station, the adrenaline started wearing off, replaced by violent shaking. The police investigation revealed what I'd suspected. My GPS had been hacked using a sophisticated spoofing system that could override satellite signals. They'd been doing it for months, targeting women driving alone at night. 3 other drivers had disappeared after their GPS led them into that same industrial area. None of them had been found. They never caught the people in the vans. The police found their setup, though. Signal boosters and GPS spoofing equipment hidden in abandoned buildings throughout the industrial district. They had cameras, too, watching the streets, waiting for suitable targets. The detective said it was one of the most sophisticated carjacking operations he'd ever seen. Now I drive with my GPS off. I keep paper maps in my car, and I learn my routes the old-fashioned way. Sometimes passengers think I'm paranoid when I refuse to use navigation apps, especially at night. That's when I show them the photos of my car after it went through the fence, and I tell them this story. Because technology doesn't just make us safer, it can also make us vulnerable. Those GPS signals we blindly trust can be hijacked. Those convenient routes can lead us straight into traps. And sometimes, the difference between being a survivor and being a statistic is knowing when to stop following directions. The repair shop couldn't fix the wrinkles in my car's hood where it hit the fence. I kept them as a reminder. Every time I see those dents catching the streetlights, I think about those vans, about the other women who weren't lucky enough to break free, about how close I came to becoming another unsolved case. I think about how many other drivers are out there right now, following their GPS down dark streets, trusting technology more than their instincts. I wonder how many of them will notice when their navigation system starts leading them astray, when the vans start appearing in their mirrors, when their phones suddenly can't call for help. And I hope they remember this story. I hope they remember that sometimes the real danger isn't in getting lost. It's in being led exactly where someone else wants you to go. So the next time your GPS tries to reroute you down a dark street, ask yourself, who else might be following those directions? And more importantly, where are they really trying to lead you? The first rule of late-night driving: never stop for a broken-down car. I knew this. We all know this. But when I saw that minivan with its hazards on and a woman waving frantically, I broke that rule. Sometimes I wake up in cold sweats thinking about how close that one moment of compassion came to costing me everything. It was just after midnight on Route 6, that endless stretch of highway cutting through Nebraska's farmland. I'd been driving for hours, staying awake with gas station coffee and true crime podcasts. Ironically enough, the woman looked harmless enough, middle-aged, wearing what looked like business casual clothes, holding a cell phone up like she was searching for signal. I'd passed 3 other cars in the last hour, none of which had stopped to help. That should have been my first warning. My second should have been how quickly she lowered her phone when my brake lights lit up the road. But I was tired, and sometimes fatigue makes us see the best in people when we should be looking for the worst. I pulled over about 50 feet ahead of her van, checking my mirrors out of habit. That's when I noticed something odd: fresh tire tracks leading into the cornfield behind her vehicle. Not just one set, but several, all disappearing into the same gap between the rows. My window was already rolling down when my brain finally processed what my eyes were seeing. The tracks were too deliberate, too perfectly spaced. They looked like they'd been made by vehicles pulling in and out, over and over, wearing a path into the soil. Oh, thank goodness you stopped. The woman was walking toward my car, her heels clicking on the asphalt. Something about her gait seemed rehearsed, like an actor hitting their mark. My van just died, and there's no self-service out here. I kept my window only partially down, my hand on the gear shift. Up close, I could see her clothes didn't quite fit right, like they'd been chosen from a costume rack. Her makeup was too perfect for someone who'd supposedly been stranded for hours. "Have you called for help?" I asked, even though I knew I had full bars on my phone. She was still approaching, but her eyes kept darting to something behind my car. "No service," she said, holding up her phone again. "Would you mind if I use yours? Or maybe you could give me a ride to the next town." It's not far. That's when I saw it in my side mirror, movement in the cornfield. Someone was walking parallel to the road, staying just inside to cover the corn stalks. Then another shadow and another. At least 3 people, moving with purpose. My heart started hammering against my ribs. Every true crime story I'd ever heard was screaming in my head. I noticed other details now. No luggage visible in her van, no personal items on the dashboard, no real signs that it had been actually driven. "I can call someone for you," I offered, keeping my voice steady as I reached for my phone. She took another step forward, and I saw her expression change for just a split second. Frustration, anger, then back to the mask of helplessness. "Oh, would you?" Her hand moved toward her pocket. "Let me give you the number dash." A twig snapped in the darkness behind my car. I looked in my mirrors again and saw a pickup truck emerging slowly from the field access road. Its headlights off. Everything clicked into place. The worn tire tracks, the hidden vehicles, the woman's too perfect appearance. This wasn't a stranded motorist. This was a trap. I slammed my car into drive just as she lunged toward my window. Something metallic glinted in her hand. A taser, I think. My tires spun on the loose gravel as I accelerated, and I heard shouts from the cornfield. The pickup truck's engine roared to life. In my rear-view mirror, I saw the woman's helpless act vanish completely. She was sprinting back to the van, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. More vehicles were emerging from the field now. Another truck, a dark SUV. They followed me for 10 miles, trying to flank me on the empty highway. I was doing over 90, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. Every time they got close, I swerved unpredictably, not letting them box me in. Eventually, their headlights fell back and disappeared. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next major town, where I pulled into a police station parking lot and finally let myself fall apart. The officer who took my statement didn't seem surprised. He pulled out a file with photos of other stranded vehicles reported in the area. Same stretch of highway, same basic setup. "You're lucky," he said. "Most people who stop either get robbed or worse. We've had 3 vehicles found abandoned there this year. Drivers missing. The woman is new, though. Usually it's a man pretending to have engine trouble. They sent patrol cars out, but of course, the van and the woman were long gone. The tire tracks in the field were the only evidence anything had happened at all. The officer told me they suspected an organized group working the highways, moving between states, changing their tactics just enough to avoid establishing a pattern. Later, I looked up missing persons reports from that area. The numbers made my blood run cold. So many travelers who simply vanished. Their cars found empty along remote stretches of highway. How many of them had stopped to help someone who seemed to be in trouble? How many had made the same decision I did, but didn't notice the warning signs in time? I still drive that route sometimes. I have to for work. Every time I pass that spot, I look for tire tracks in the field. Sometimes I see them, fresh ones, and I wonder how many other traps have been set there. I wonder about the woman, about who she really is, about how many other roles she's played in this deadly roadside theater. The experience changed me. I installed cameras in my car, front, rear, and sides. I keep a GPS tracker hidden under my seat. I have a satellite phone for emergencies. Some people call it paranoid. I call it surviving. Because here's the thing about highway predators. They count on our humanity. They know that despite all the warnings, despite all the horror stories, there will always be people who stop to help. They prey on our best instincts, our unwillingness to drive past someone who might genuinely need assistance. So now when I see a stranded vehicle, I call the police. Let them check it out. Let them be the ones to approach. And I keep driving, watching my mirrors, looking for tire tracks where they shouldn't be, remembering the look on that woman's face when her mask slipped. Sometimes, late at night, I think about what would have happened if I hadn't noticed those tracks in the field. If I hadn't seen the movement in my mirrors. If I'd been just a little more tired, a little less observant, would my car have become another abandoned vehicle on the side of the road? Would my name be another entry in a missing persons database? The first rule of late-night driving is never stop for a broken-down car. The second rule is trust your instincts, because sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding in the dark. They're standing in plain sight, waving for help, counting on your compassion to lower your guard. And those tire tracks leading into the cornfield, they're still there, fresh ones appearing all the time, waiting for the next good Samaritan to stop and help. Growing up, my father always told me to follow road signs without question. They're there for your safety, he'd say. But that night in rural Montana, those signs nearly led my family into a trap that still haunts my dreams. It started with a simple orange detour sign. Construction ahead, follow detour. Nothing unusual about that, except for the time, 11:47 p.m. My wife, Lisa, was asleep in the passenger seat. Our two kids finally quiet in the back after hours of "Are we there yet?" We were on the last leg of our trip to my parents' house in Washington State. The first detour arrow directed us off the main highway onto a county road. I remember thinking it was odd that there weren't any construction vehicles visible. No flashing lights. No signs of actual work being done. But the signs looked official enough in my headlights, bright orange, reflective lettering, all properly placed. We followed the arrows deeper into the countryside, each turn taking us further from the highway. The paved road gave way to gravel, then to packed dirt. My GPS started showing signal lost, but the detour signs kept appearing, each one promising that the highway was just ahead. Lisa woke up when we hit the gravel. "Where are we?" she asked, that edge of concern in her voice that mothers get when something feels wrong. "Detour," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Construction on the main road." She frowned, checking her phone. No signal. "How long have we been off the highway?" I checked the clock. 23 minutes. That's when I noticed something else. The detour signs were getting less professional looking. The first ones had been pristine, but these were weathered, some barely readable, almost like they'd been out here for months. Then we saw the guardrail. It appeared in my headlights, a section of metal barrier at a curve in the road, crumpled and bent outward. Behind it, a steep drop into darkness. But what made my skin crawl was the damage pattern. Multiple impact points, all at different heights and angles, like several cars had gone through at different times. "Tom," Lisa whispered, "something's wrong." I slowed down, scanning the tree line. That's when we spotted the first abandoned car, half hidden in the underbrush. Then another, and another. They were partially concealed by branches and debris, but once you knew what to look for, they were everywhere. "Dad?" Emily's voice came from the back seat. "Why are there cars in the woods?" Before I could answer, headlights appeared behind us. A truck, moving fast, high beams blazing. I sped up, but the road was getting narrower, more treacherous. The truck gained on us, and I could see another vehicle joining it. Lisa was fully awake now, twisting around to watch the approaching lights. "They're hurting us," she said, her voice tight with fear. "Each turn, they're forcing us toward that ravine." She was right. The detour signs, the damaged guardrail, the hidden vehicles. It was all part of a setup. How many other families had followed these signs in the dark? How many had ended up going through that guardrail, either by force or by accident on the unfamiliar road? I had to make a decision. Ahead, the road curved sharply toward the ravine. To the left was a steep embankment, too rough for our minivan, but maybe just passable. To the right, dense forest. The trucks were almost on us now. I yanked the wheel left, killing the headlights. Lisa screamed as we bounced up the embankment, the van's undercarriage scraping on rocks. The kids were fully awake now, crying in the back. Behind us, I heard the truck skid to a stop, unable to follow up the steep slope. We crested the hill, and I saw salvation. the glow of the highway through the trees. We'd made a rough circle while following those detour signs. The whole setup was designed to lead people away from safety, deeper into a maze of back roads until they ran out of options. I didn't stop driving until we reached a state trooper station 40 miles later. The officer who took our statement pulled out a thick file before I even finished talking. Similar reports going back months. Families forced off remote highways by fake construction detours, most escaping, some vanishing entirely. They found the setup the next day. The fake signs had been carefully placed to guide vehicles along an increasingly dangerous route. At the final turn, where we'd seen the damaged guardrail, they discovered fresh skid marks and broken glass. The officer said they'd been investigating disappearances along that stretch for over a year, but they never caught anyone. The trucks vanished. The remaining signs were removed and the whole operation moved elsewhere. The officer told us these groups are mobile, setting up similar traps along remote highways across multiple states. They prey on tired travelers, using our trust and official signage against us. Now I keep a GPS unit with offline maps. I research road work schedules before long trips. And most importantly, I've taught my kids what I wish I'd known that night. Sometimes the signs you're supposed to trust are the ones you should question the most. Emily still has nightmares about those headlights behind us. Jake, my youngest, gets scared whenever we pass road construction. Lisa refuses to drive at night anymore. And me? I can't see an orange detour sign without checking every detail, without scanning the tree line for hidden vehicles, without wondering if this one is real or if it's leading us into another trap. Because the scariest part wasn't the chase or the hidden cars, or even the damaged guardrail. It was realizing how easily we follow directions without questioning them, how willingly we drive into darkness because a sign tells us to, how completely we trust in systems that can be turned against us. I think about the other vehicles we saw hidden in those woods. How many families followed those signs, thinking they were doing the right thing? How many realized too late that they were being led into a trap? And how many others are out there right now, following detour signs in the dark, not knowing what waits at the end of that road? The police never found all the cars they spotted from aerial searches of that area. Some were too deeply hidden in the ravine, too tangled in vegetation. They said it could take years to recover them all. Years to identify everyone who followed those signs and never made it back to the highway. Sometimes, when I'm driving at night and I see a detour sign, I think about turning around. But I also think about my father's words about trusting the signs. He wasn't wrong. Most of the time, they are there for our safety. The problem is knowing when they're not. So I follow detours only in daylight now. Only when I can see construction crews, when I can verify the work being done. And I keep teaching my kids a lesson we learned that night in Montana. Just because something looks official doesn't mean it's safe. Sometimes the most dangerous traps are the ones that look like help. Because somewhere out there, those trucks are still waiting. Those signs are still being placed. And tonight, someone else will see an orange detour sign on a dark highway and have to make a choice. Follow it blindly or question what lies ahead. Choose wisely. Your life might depend on it.